All right, welcome back. Dome Theory, Bobby Manning here on CLNS Media. We are live today, doing this in the afternoon ahead of our Celtics game against the Bulls tonight. We'll be going live for that. But checking in here with the Clippers, who won last night, I believe, right? Over the who'd they play last night? The
Minnesota, yeah, beat the
Minnesota
Timberwolves.
Timberwolves. Yep. So they're on a tear right now. And I know all the Celtics fans are going to be asking you about Rajon Rondo here live in the chat as he comes to LA and basically turns his team around. It, haven't even gotten to playoff Rondo yet, and the experience is already starting to manifest itself. We're going to talk about that and a ton of stuff here with Noah Eagle, who is their radio play-by-play guy out there in LA, as well as perfect for this show, a fellow Syracuse grad. He was there when I was there, probably like a year or two apart. I was in the press rooms before those games, and I knew who you were because of who your dad was. We weren't that. Yeah. I probably said hi to you or something back then, but I've always wanted to interview you, get to know your experience, and there are a million different ways I could come at this. You've probably been interviewed 100 times throughout your career about you and your dad's relationship, but thanks to the news this week that Jimmy Boeheim is going to be transferring to Syracuse, I can come at this a different way and ask this Boeheim experience at Syracuse. Now, coming into this next season, it's going to be Jimmy Boeheim, Buddy Boeheim, as well as Jim Boeheim at the helm for year 45 or 46 now for him at Syracuse. And I've just found it so fascinating. Obviously, I think you covered Buddy Boeheim's freshman year before you graduated. I covered his sophomore year. And then last year, of course, he just became a national sensation in the March Madness during his junior year. And now next year, it's just going to be Boeheim Palooza up there. But I've always found it so fascinating how, obviously, if you're Buddy Boeheim, if you're Jimmy Boeheim, you have like the world of basketball access. You get to meet Kobe Bryant and Team USA growing up. You get to be in the stands in New Orleans as Carmelo Anthony went. You're just around basketball your whole life. You have the money, you have the training, but there's that drive you still have to reach to be able to make it to that level. Because I said this about Buddy, we've seen a million coaches' sons walk onto their teams and just be, walk-ons, not play at all. For Buddy to legitimately become the best player on the team last year by the time March Madness came around, it's just mind-blowing to me. So you, being a son of notable player in your field as well, what's it take? How do you muster up that drive at that level to be that great, even though you had something to fall back on in your father's sense there?
Well, Bobby, I appreciate you having me and looking forward to some Celtics and Rondo talk and some maybe even mustache talk, because yours is absolutely outstanding. And I feel like I should have come to the table with more in my facial hair game, and that was a miss by me. So for next time, for next time, I'll be ready to go. Maybe I'll have a full James Harden beard. Who knows? Look, the world is everybody's oyster, right? So anything is possible. But for the Boeheim family, at least drawing on my personal experience to answer your question, I think that when I decided I wanted to go into this business, I knew what was going to be attached. I knew that there would be murmurs or there would be thoughts from people that I was getting certain things just because of my name. And that might be true, by the way. I might have opportunities because of who my father is and how he has interacted and gone about his business over the course of his career. And so as a result, my mentality, at least going into school, was, well, I have to work twice as hard to prove that it's more than just that, and that I can do it myself, and that I can prove that I am worthy of any of these assignments. Now, whether or not that's true remains to be seen, but I do think that at least subconsciously it did force me to put in that work to an even greater degree than maybe I would have before. And the other thing that it did for me was growing up around it, I got to really see how the sausage was made behind the curtain. I got to really see what it took on a day-to-day basis to get to the eventual destination.
Did you have that 2003 Buddy Boeheim at the national championship? Like, what would that moment be for you?
There were a lot of them. I mean, there were countless moments like that growing up where I just got to tag along and be a part of something and see either whether it was the Nets or whether it was NFL stuff, just to see it firsthand and be there in the booth. And so, sure, I'm sure that there are some photos of me when I was younger at the U.S. Open or at Jets games or at Nets games or whatever it might be that were at least in the vicinity where I wasn't maybe traveling, and then some that I actually happened to be in a certain place, and that's where he was going to be. And so we just made it work. But yeah, no, I think that when I look at Buddy and Jimmy, especially Buddy at first, let's just look at the whole situation. So Jim Boeheim says that, okay, I'm only going to offer them the scholarship spot if they're worthy of that scholarship spot. He felt Jimmy wasn't quite ready when he was out of high school. So Jimmy was good enough to play Division I at a pretty high level. He goes to Cornell, and he plays very well over the course of 3 seasons at Cornell. Plays very well. He was their leading scorer in his final year there. So he developed. And now, as we've seen with Buddy, Jim thought Buddy's ready right now, and he's going to develop into a great player. He had the foresight to see it. He's obviously got, as you said, decades worth of experience. He knows what it takes, and he saw that Buddy had what it takes. And Buddy, to his credit, has put tireless work in. And I've talked to a lot of people within the program that just say that he works as hard as anybody across the country. And you can see it because you said it, Bobby. He's already taken some ridiculous strides forward in just a couple of years on campus. I can't imagine now to have that familiarity with your brother on the same team, your father coaching the team, to take another stride moving forward. It seems inevitable at this point based on his hard work. So just from my experience, I think being able to see what it took every single day and almost having that get into your brain like osmosis, that helps. And then in the back of my mind, I'm always making sure that I put in maximum work leading up to any of these events. I'm doing whatever I possibly can to cover every single base, because I do know that people will still say, well, he's just there because of this, this, and this. So, you know, I would hope that over time, similar with Buddy, people just say, oh, wait a second. Okay, no, he's clearly done the work and he's earned his spot here. But that comes with time, and that comes with proving yourself.
For sure. Was that a good enough way? Was that different than the way you've been asked that in the past? I hope.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. There's a variety of directions you could go, but yeah,
we do that differently here on Dome Theory. So what I find most interesting about you and, you know, differentiating yourself from your father so far in your career is that forward vision you've had for the role, the broadcasting, you know, position in sports. And it's going to have to change into the future. It already is. And you've been part of it, finding different ways to do things and just connecting with a different audience, because, you know, sports viewers have gotten older. Sports consumption has gone down in the country, and the reasons for that have been thrown around all over the place for various different reasons. But I think part of it is that the audience has gotten older. Some of those people have moved on from that, gotten too old to keep following sports as a whole. And younger people, you know, by and large, all these studies are showing that, you know, they're on their phone watching highlights. They're on YouTube more than they're watching games on TV. Certainly the radio at this point in the role that you're in right now. So, you know, we'll talk about your Nickelodeon experience during the NFL playoffs, but in your day-to-day role as LA Clippers broadcaster on the radio, hop in the car, turn that dial, find the game, either that or people are going to have to, you know, download an app and find your broadcast on there on the phone. How have you, you know, with a forward-looking vision in this job, tried to draw new audiences, you know, move kind of this role that's very traditional, you know, almost like 100 years old at this point, into the future, and, you know, make it something that younger people can connect with out there in LA?
That is the dilemma. That is the biggest question mark of how to do it. And I think the biggest thing with any of these roles that I'm doing, you mentioned the Nickelodeon game, or whether it even be with the Clippers, in a sense, you have a blank canvas, and it's up to you to go out. Certainly that Nickelodeon game, because that had never been done before. We had a completely blank canvas. We could mold it and color it any way we wanted to make it seem like it was supposed to be. And so I think it goes to at least a certain extent for that Clipper job as well. In my opinion, I want to bridge the gap, and I want to reach a wide-ranging audience. So I want people who are 12 years old, just starting to get into the game, all the way through 72 years old, who have been following the game since the days of Wilt and Bill Russell or whoever. I want all of them to be enjoying and to be into it. And I want to find a connection with all of them. And I think a big reason that I enjoy TV, movies, music, books, I have to be extremely well-rounded so that I can find a connection with anybody in any age group. And so that's something that I try to incorporate on the broadcast, whether it be something I see on TikTok, so maybe then a teenager might like it, or it's something that I read or watched a movie from years back, and I can drop a line from the movie Airplane, and maybe somebody else will like it. Whatever it might be, if I can find just a wide-ranging set of connections, I guess, to people, that's really what I want to do. Because at the end of the day, we always hear a lot of, if you went to Syracuse, you've probably heard this at least once, consider the listener, right? So how do I consider the listener? Well, I want to make them feel like we're just having a conversation and they're right there sitting next to me. And so the best way to do that is to make a connection with them. And the best way to make a connection with a wide-ranging group of people is to be just well-rounded in general. So I try to watch as much as possible. I try to consume as much as possible. I try to stay current with the news. I try to stay current with trends online. All of that goes into the preparation process, so to speak, on a more of a fun degree. But it still is part of it. It's part of the mold, part of what will make me into the broadcaster I hope to be. So it's just incorporating a wide variety of things into my game calls. And that's a skill that I've continued to try to sharpen now with each game.
Yeah, so we kicked around before we started recording here, the two guys in Boston who had been doing it for years and years at this point, Mike Gorman on the TV side, Sean Grandy on the radio side. And there is a big difference between how you have to call these games on TV and radio, because there's just so much more ground to cover in the radio one. You're working hard trying to just let people know what's going on. There's not as much liberty as there is on the TV side to toss a lot of that other stuff in. But I do find it interesting, the contrast between Gorman and Grandy. Grandy, ultra prepared, facts, all these illusions. He has like records and records of like the leading scorers in TD Garden history, just all these different files that he's always tossing out on Twitter, using Twitter as kind of like a second bonus to his broadcast. And then you have Gorman, who, when you follow him and Tommy for all these years, Gorman was that way when he first came in. He had the papers and all these facts and interviews lined up with people, and just like this pile of papers on the table. And Tommy, when he saw it the first time that they were calling a game together, threw him off the table and said, "We're just talking about the game." And so that's how Gorman approached it from that time on. He wasn't over prepared in a sense. He was just, trying to have a conversation, a fun time, and just talk about what was going on in front of him with Tommy. And that was basically the persona that they took on for the rest of their careers. Right now in your career, what's your preparation process like? What do you try to be as a broadcaster between those two extremes there, I guess you could call them? And, do you see that evolving over time?
Well, Bobby, to your point, there's a reason that Mike and Tommy have been so beloved for so many years. It's because they make people feel, and we had been talking about this before we went live, but they make people feel like it, right? You're inviting them to be on this inside of watching the game with these two guys, as if you're all sitting on the couch and drinking beers. It's tougher to do that on the radio because most of the time people are driving when they're listening to you, or they're stuck in traffic out here in LA, which is very common. So for me, it can be good that there's traffic all the time, right? Because that means that there are more people who are going to maybe turn it on because they want to see they want to hear what's going on. They want to hear how the Clippers are playing. For me, I would say, it's blending the two because, first of all, I do the games alone, and so that already contributes to then how I have to call it, right? I have to almost wear both hats at times because I have to call the action, and then sometimes I have to explain why something happened on the floor to make sure that it's all taken care of under one umbrella. Whereas, Sean has Max, so you've got somebody who's there, who's played a long time, who really has a good knowledge of the game, and he can provide that insight of what this play looked like or why they're doing this in this situation. So for me, I have to try to cover all of that. So that does factor in my preparation process because I want to watch some film. I want to watch certain things to see, okay, what happens in this situation. I read a lot of articles about the opposing teams, especially, so I have a good feel for what their season has looked like, what they do in certain situations, what different players have been doing recently. So for me, it's a lot of stats. I get prepared with a lot of personal background on guys. So, for example, last night, played the Minnesota Timberwolves. So I'm trying to think of a D'Angelo Russell, let's say. D'Angelo Russell started his career in LA. with the Lakers. So it's an easy thing to drop in there. He had played a couple of years. He played his first 2 seasons with the Lakers, gets traded to Brooklyn, plays 2 years in Brooklyn. Then he signs the max contract with the Warriors. Then he gets traded midseason to Minnesota. And so now having all of that, that can kill any maybe dead ball time. As someone who does the games alone, I'm going to need that. I'm going to need that to potentially fill some of that airtime. And so it's having that stuff in the back of my mind. I go deep into the analytics stats. I don't necessarily use very difficult analytic stats because I don't think most people understand them. And so if most people don't understand them, then it's not going to behoove me to say, well, they're third in the NBA in rebounding percentage if I then have to spend 10 seconds explaining what rebounding percentage means, right? And rebounding percentage is one of the surface level ones. There are some deeper ones that I could use, like VORP, that nobody's going to care what VORP and who's leading the league in VORP.
That's when people are going to turn it off.
Correct. So it's balancing those two. It's balancing the stats and the right stats in the right moments with the human interest stories and humanizing the players with then all of those references that I had talked about earlier of connecting with. So it's all a balancing act over the course of a 48-minute game. And I'm still working to perfect all of it, and I don't think I ever will. I'm just going to be working towards that perfect game. I know Mike Tirico came back to campus when maybe you were probably a freshman. I think I was a sophomore, and he had said, I'm still looking for perfection, and I think every broadcaster is. Every broadcaster wants that perfect game, and they never, ever feel like they'll get it, but that's what keeps you working. That's what keeps you driven, and so that, for me, is exactly what I'm looking for.
Do you labor over the game long, or you just right on to the next one? Are you looking back saying, I could have done this? Do you even listen back?
No, you can't let it keep you up at night. If I did that, I literally wouldn't sleep, and then that wouldn't be healthy because my next game would be even worse. So, no, what I do is I come back home, the highlights get sent over to me, I listen back to the highlights, I listen back to maybe a stretch or two, say, okay, here's where I could have improved, and then I try to work on that for the next game, and the same process continues. But my goal will always, has been since I got here, it'll always be, no matter what I'm doing, my next broadcast, I would like it to be better than my previous one. If I'm doing that and every single time I'm on the air I get slightly better, then I'll feel like I'm doing my job well.
So I'm going to toss a couple at you here. The feedback, whether it's a fan or whether it's Steve Ballmer coming to you and giving you some feedback on this so far. What's that been like since you started this job? And you talked about like that dynamic. You're mentioning Lakers stuff in these broadcasts because this is forever going to be a Lakers city out there in LA. So you're almost appealing to that market as well. And that's interesting because that's what your dad's done his whole career in New York, being kind of the junior team in New York City. You know, most people care about the Knicks. It's probably a little more balance out there, and it's balanced out a bit since the Clippers have gotten better in LA, but it's still like that's always going to be the B team in LA. And that kind of, I'm sure, has to come into how you cover the team there.
Yeah, I think there's a misconception from people that the Clippers are trying to steal Laker fans and they're trying to overtake the Lakers and this, and that. Just not the case. You know, Steve Ballmer is very savvy. For those who don't know, he's our team owner. Very savvy about how he goes about cultivating this fan base. He wants to captivate younger people so that they grow with the team. That's why he's moving to a new arena in the next couple of years. He wants to build his own space. He wants it to be futuristic, state-of-the-art, one of the best, if not the best, basketball viewing experiences in the entire world. And so he's working tirelessly every single day to make sure he accomplishes that goal. And so he's not saying, hey, we know that you've been a Laker fan 20 years, but we think you should join the Clipper Nation. That's not what it is. And I think that's what people get upset with out here for some reason. There are people who are like, hey, it's never gonna be a Clipper town. We're saying, yeah, we're not saying it's going to be a Clipper town. We're just saying we've got our own little niche and we're trying to win a championship. And that's it. And so it can get contentious out here for sure, but I think that's the best part about it. It makes it so much fun. It really does. And you guys in Boston know about the Laker rivalry, what that's like. It's been established for sure out here. And when you talk to players, they certainly feel it. Talk to coaches, they certainly feel it. And I can tell you from the broadcasting perspective, being in Staples Center last year for Clipper Laker games before the COVID shutdown, it was nothing I'd ever felt before, including a full packed Carrier Dome, which is saying something.
Well, how about Harold walking across the hall the way he did in free agency? That was like, what's going on here? That was like, some Nets or some Mets Yankee stuff from back in the day. Like, you're going to see a guy walking from one side of the town to the other. In this case, it's the same building. And those two teams were supposed to be on that collision course in the conference finals. They never got there. But that was one of the weirdest stories in all of free agency. Was not only him leaving the Clippers, where he was, a huge part of that team's come up, but going over to the Lakers after they won the championship. Like that had to be part of the contentiousness there too.
Yeah, I think that the Clippers had some plans, and clearly those plans ended up panning out. They signed Serge Ibaka, and that was really more of what they were looking for. They felt enough of that size at that position. And so Montrez, while he is a great offensive threat, he's a great screen setter, he's a hustle player, he takes a lot of charges, he box guys out at an elite level in the NBA. He still is only about 6'7", 6'8", and so come playoff time, they struggled in terms of that size. They really did, especially against Nikola Jokic. And so what they have now, and once Serge is healthy again, and now that they've signed Boogie Cousins as well, they have 3 7-footers with Zubac, Ibaka, and Boogie, and that's huge for them. So Trey missed, and he meant a whole lot to this organization, but they feel really good about right now. This is a team that feels pretty balanced, and the addition of Ibaka was a big factor in all of that as well. So it's been great to be a part of the Laker-Clipper rivalry so far. In my time, it's been only these two teams being both great. Usually when one of them's really good, the other one's not. If you look at the last decade plus, obviously through the 2000s era, it was all Lakers, no Clippers. The 2010s, for the most part, it was all Clippers, no Lakers. After they won their second title in 2010, they didn't make the playoffs again after 2012 up until last year. And so you look at that stretch, it was Lob City. That was all the success out here in La La Land. And so it's funny now that to see them both at the top, both of them being the Western Conference favorite, so to speak, that's been awesome to be a part of. And I'm really excited for when full fans, a full Staples Center can be back in business, because it's been an energy I've never felt before.
So let's do the Rondo thing. And this year's team in general, so interesting. Obviously, they should be ranked among the favorites to come out of the West, but that thing from last year just stains everybody's consciousness. What happened in that NBA bubble with them and the Nuggets there. A different team this year to some degree, same core. I do find it interesting. Them and the Celtics, so similar. They played great games because you get those 2-star wings. You get contributing forces there on the wing as well. Marcus Morris was an awesome Celtic. I still love him with the Clippers. Both teams need a little help at that point guard spot. Celtics went out and got Evan Fournier as a ball handler, and the Clippers got Rajon Rondo, which made a ton of sense. They needed a guy to set up the offense. They needed a guy who would win the playoffs, and that's a guy that they wanted in free agency, but ultimately just couldn't sign over the Hawks. So it was great to see him finally end up there because it made a ton of sense. And they've gone on a tear since he arrived. He's gotten the ball moving more. He's a good defender, playoff experience, all that stuff. It's interesting, though, because you're kind of looking at this from a distance. You're not talking and interacting with the players the way you would be in a normal year. So it's probably tougher to feel like what kind of impact he's had on the room. But from the distance that you're looking at it, what has Rondo brought to the team on the court and off the court?
Yeah, so I mean, we do get, or at least I get to talk to Tyronn Lue before every game, and so having that interaction and really picking his brain about what Rondo has already done to this organization, to this group, has been great to get some insight. And to me, that's been the biggest factor in all of it. And I know people have talked about it, but when Rondo was with the Celtics, throughout that great stretch that he had where he made 4 All-Star teams, Tyronn Lue was an assistant coach for at least, I think, 4 years. And so to have those two, they're incredibly close, because Doc had assigned T. Lue as Rondo's guy. That was his assignment. He was the Rondo whisperer. That's what they called him. And they established this great friendship over those years where it's almost as if they share a brain when it comes to basketball. They both watch hours and hours and hours of film. They both stay up way past the time that they probably should, just to make sure that they're watching other teams. They know exactly what they're going to get themselves into for the next game. And so it's been a perfect partnership to have those two, and then to have Chauncey Billups as well. You've got 3 guys who have played the point guard position at an elite level in the NBA. And what Rondo has brought already is raised the basketball IQ of the team. You mentioned it. He's got the ball moving at a very high clip. He's shooting the ball well still. And if you look over the last 5-6 years, he has shot it well from three over the course of those years. He's been league average or better the majority of those seasons.
Unbelievable. Him and Derrick
really
Rose were the two guys you never thought.
No, and last year in the bubble during the championship run for the Lakers, he shot 40% from three. And it wasn't like he wasn't taking them. He was taking a couple of them per game. And so to have that boost off the bench now, and Patrick Beverley has been out of the lineup for the majority of the second half of the season. He's going to miss the next few weeks with a broken hand. So to have Rondo and have that calming presence down the stretch in games, it's made all the difference. And I think that's the biggest key, right? Let's look at those two Celtics games as a great example. The Clippers, the first game didn't have Paul George, which hurt them, although Boston didn't have Jaylen Brown. And Jayson Tatum has crushed the Clippers, it seems like, every time they play. Jayson Tatum, whenever anybody asks me, who are you most impressed with around the NBA? Last year, I got this question all the time. Now that you've seen every team, you've seen every player in person, who impressed you more than like you thought they would? Jayson Tatum's the first answer every single time. He is out of this world impressive. I think I've said this a couple times. I think he'll win the MVP by the time he's 27 years old. He's that good. And so he's crushed the Clippers. But to go back point, those two games, it was a lack of execution in the final 3 or so minutes from LA. And they had those issues earlier this season. Well, for the most part, those issues have been somewhat fixed with Rondo there. You look at a close game against the Phoenix Suns, they pull it out in the end. You look at a close game at points in the fourth quarter against the Pacers on the road, they pull it out in the end. A close game against Detroit without their two stars and without Marcus Morris, without really all five starters essentially. Well, they pull it out down the stretch. And Rondo's IQ, he's coached up his teammates. His calming presence has been a huge factor. So he's really made his mark early on this team. They've only lost once since he made his debut, and that was a 3-point loss in they had chances down the stretch. So you feel good about where this team is right now. Everyone you talk to, including T. Lou, has just said, we feel really great about the position we're at this point of the season. And they've got, I think, 13 or so games remaining to just finish up, I guess, fixing up whatever small issues they might have going into the postseason.
It's going to be a battle in the West. We got to talk about Tatum after you said that. The Celtics fans have gone through an interesting, and I'll go back to the first time I ever saw him out there in Syracuse when he was playing the Orange in that epic game where John Gillen hit the half-court shot, and everyone was going crazy about that, obviously, but I was looking at it and saying, did you just see that guy on the other side? I mean, he had, if I remember right, it was 25 points, 12 rebounds, 5 assists. And he wasn't running the offense, but he was, making these plays out of the short roll, impacting the defensive side of the floor. He had that crazy Euro step in transition. And I said, this guy doesn't belong on this court. This guy could be in the NBA right now, dominating. And then eventually the Celtics got into that lottery. I remembered that day, and I'm like, there were different doubts about his shooting and his defense and this and that, but I just remember seeing him that game and just instantly knowing, like, this guy's going to belong in that league at some level. Now, what he's accomplished, I never imagined. So early in his career, I think people forget. They say he's 19. That's like the joke in Celtics fan. He's been 19 forever, yeah. Really 23 at this point. But instantly into the league, impact defender, borderline all-defensive guy last year, which is what goes underrated about his game. And then the offense speaks for itself. Then in the bubble last year, at 22, becoming the playmaker that he did, 4 assists a game, running the offense for large stretches of that playoff run. He did have a few games here or there where the turnovers got a little high, and I felt like that cost him a few games. But again, you look at the total package here and say he's not going to hit his prime for a couple more years, and he's already one of the best players in the game, period. And so, I hear you say that. In Celtics land, there's been a little overreaction this year because the team's been up and down. He's had his up and downs through COVID, and people are wondering, is he really that great? Now he's come back in a big way this past month, 50, 40, 90, 44-point game, 50-point game, looking like that February 2020 version of himself. But what makes you say this guy is the most impressive player in the league to you?
So he's the biggest thing is he grew more, so he's even bigger than
oh
he
my
was
Lord.
when he first got into the league. And then he filled into his frame. So it's a combination, right? When we saw him at Duke, he was wiry. He was definitely thin, but you could see the makings of what would be a strong player. And so we were watching that game. They had Tatum. They had my boy Luke Kennard, who's with the Clippers right now. And they had Grayson Allen. That was a good Duke team. And they may have even had Harry Giles on that team as well. And so they had
Jefferson. That was Jefferson.
I think they had Giles too. I want to say
Did
they
they?
had both
Off
of
the
them.
bench?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that team should have
So
went way further than it did looking back on it.
agreed. And so they were good. You know, they were a good team, and Kennard was, I believe, their leading scorer that year. But Tatum, you're right. It's the fluidity in his game. It's just he can do a little bit of everything. His ball handling skill is outstanding. He can get his shot off over anybody. And I think that's the biggest key, right? It does not matter how close a defender is. It doesn't matter how draped the defender is. Doesn't matter what caliber that defender is. He gets his shot off. Doesn't matter. And you know exactly what he's going to do. Little step back to his right or left. You know exactly what's coming. Doesn't matter. You can't guard it. And he's just unfazed defensively. And so I think we've seen a toughness. We've seen a willingness to do whatever it takes to win. And I've heard from many people now that he works as hard as anybody around the league. And when you hear that and you hear his desire to continue to get better, to me, that just spells a recipe for a guy who's only going to get better and keep improving, which is scary because he's already, to me, one of the best wings in the NBA. And you give him a couple of years, I think he'll be an MVP within the next 4 years.
For sure. Now, MVP this year, another story. Couple guys being mentioned. You've tossed around the award discussions on your Sirius show. Jokic seems to be the consensus now. Others are holding out on Embiid despite the missed games. You're seeing other people included in this discussion. And I don't go as crazy about this as some other people do. Like, I've heard people on podcasts saying, like, we need a real assessment of what this award means. We can't figure it out. Like, you just kind of go with your guy and then, let the results show. And they usually get it right. There's a few years looking back that maybe they got bored with Jordan or got bored with some other people who were winning it a ton, Kareem way back. But year in and year out, it feels like they get it close. You could say, oh, LeBron should win it every year, which some people do because of his stature in this league. But this is the most interesting race we've ever had, at least in our memories probably. You could throw Kawhi into that race. You could make the case for Steph Curry with the last month that he's just had. And the schedule, the injuries, and the COVID over the league have made it that much harder for voters this year to consider, an Embiid's case. And he's actually my guy. Because I discount the, probably 10, 12 games that he's missed there. I'm just going off what he's shown on the court, what he's meant to Philly, and how he's powered that team to the top of the East. That's kind of my depiction of it. And maybe that is the problem with this, is that you have a lot of different people looking at it with different ideas of what MVP is. But it's made it really contentious this year. I don't know if you heard Brian Windhorst and those ESPN guys screaming at each other on the podcast.
Yeah.
Oh, my Lord. It's getting hot out there.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we have to keep in mind when it comes to MVP is it changes, the criteria changes year to year based on the circumstance of the season. And so if we were going by straight value, then yes, LeBron James is going to win every year because his value to his team, as we've seen over the course of time, is always going to be the greatest in the NBA. I mean, look, he goes to Cleveland first overall in 2003 to make the playoffs within 2 years, and they were in the playoffs every year after that. He leaves, they're the worst team in the NBA. He goes to Miami, a team that was struggling to get over the hump. They win a title within 2 years. They go back-to-back. He goes back to Cleveland after they did not make the playoffs once. You realize the last time that the Cavaliers made the playoffs without LeBron James, Mike Fratello was their coach in the 90s. That's how long it's been. And so for his value is greater than anybody in the NBA. So yes, he would win it every year if it was just based on value. But that's not what it's based on. It's all based on best season overall, what you meant to your team during this season over the course of 82, or in this case, 72 games. And this year in particular, you said it, durability is going to be a major factor. And that's why Nikola Jokic is number one on pretty much every list right now. He's played in every single game. Yeah. He has not missed a single game for the Denver Nuggets. And by the way, if they can maintain that 4 spot in the West now without Jamal Murray the rest of the season, it's only going to help his case because he's going to have to put the team on his back even more right now after having several 40-point games, after having absurd triple-doubles all year, and the fact that he's been there every game. You said Embiid's missed, 12 to 13? He's missed 18 games this year. And there's only one MVP, I believe, that's played less than, I think it's 78% of a team's games. That's Bill Walton, who played, I think, 72 to 73%. I don't know. Those aren't exact stats, but it's somewhere in that ballpark. The other thing I'll tell you, the argument for the Currys and the Dame Lillards of the world. There's only one MVP in recent memory over the course of several decades now that has not been in I think a top 2 or 3 seed in their conference to win it, and that's Russell Westbrook when Oklahoma City was 5 or 6, and he averaged a triple-double for the first time since Oscar Robertson. So when you look at it, it took history for him to do that. There's nothing that's historical enough this season for anybody to overcome the lack of success at the top of their conference, to overcome not getting to a certain amount of games. So to me, if Jokic keeps on the pace that he's at, if he doesn't miss a single game, or maybe he misses 1 or 2, whatever, it's all going to play into his factor and into his hand. So I think it's his to lose right now, but things change every single day in the NBA. Things change every single week. Like 3-4 weeks ago, I would have told you James Harden was right there in the running, and it looks like that's going to be out of the question as well. So it's just a year-to-year type of thing, and it feels like, I should say, Jokic's year.
Yeah, and therefore, and he's probably got it. It feels like that's a consensus guy, and the narrative is built. And again, that Murray point is going to be so important going forward, and what he's going to mean to them post Murray as they continue to try to win games here. I do think it's interesting, and this is what's taken over the sport too in recent years to some degree, is it's hard to, and this is why that screaming match kind of went on that podcast on ESPN, is that the number 2 guy, there's a feeling that he's not going to get his due, whoever that runner-up is. Even 3rd, 4th, and 5th places who have had outstanding seasons in the end. This happens every year. There's ultra memorable seasons, whether it's Kobe with Nash or some of the other runner-ups there that have happened throughout the years, that it feels like are going to get forgotten just because there's an all or nothing approach. We don't remember the runner-ups in the NBA finals in this sport fondly. We don't even remember teams making it to the conference finals as a great thing. In Boston, the Celtics have made 3 or 4 and the fans have turned it into a failure. So like this narrative around the sport, and I don't, you're in the NFL world, baseball world, all these other sports as well. It feels like the NBA has this particular problem, and we'll talk about like the narrative of the sport and where it's going, that it's all or nothing. If you're Kevin Durant, you don't have a championship, you're a failure. If you're Kevin Durant, you're not the number 1 on your team, it doesn't count. Like there's just all this, narrative-based goalpost moving in the sport on what qualifies as a success in your career or in any given season.
Yeah, I think it's good and bad, though. I think that obviously the negatives, you pointed out a whole bunch of them. I think it can be taxing on players and their mental health. It can be taxing on a fan base and their mental health if their team continuously struggles to get over that plateau. But at the same time, it keeps the league constantly relevant because there are always these conversations, there are always these talking points, and this has been cultivated, this has been molded over the years from sports talk and from Twitter, social media, and the fact that people just like to debate. I think that's the biggest thing here. People like to debate. People like to disagree in general in life. Someone could say it's my favorite color on Twitter, and I think they'd get more hate than anybody known to man. They'd say, what about blue? What about purple? It's just how it works, right? And so the NBA falls into the same umbrella in the current scope of the world in general. People just like to go back and forth. It's part of the fun. And then at the end of the day, it's like, it's all in good fun. But it does keep the league constantly relevant. And it's made
you really need water.
Seriously.
That was one.
Yeah, does water actually make you wet? Like it's just for the fun of it. But it has made the NBA 12-month-a-year league. And that is great. It's really good for the league. And so if it's going to create more intrigue and more interest from more sources, I'm all for it. I'm all down for whatever debate people want to have. I might not partake, but I'll sit on the sidelines and watch and listen.
All right, rapid fire. Your defensive player of the year.
Ben Simmons.
Most improved.
Julius Randle.
Those ones feel like givens for sure. Rookie of the year got interesting with LaMelo Ball going down. Where are you taking that one at this point?
Yeah, no, so I think it's going to take this last stretch of games here. It depends on if Sacramento can win enough and Halliburton continues to play well enough. I think he can
I love his game.
He's great, and he's a great player, and I think he could take it. Anthony Edwards would be the other. He's averaging over 18 points per game, so he could absolutely, just based on his stats alone. And you're right, the LaMelo thing was a bummer because he was playing out of his mind. So it's one of those two.
Was the dunk of the year Anthony Edwards? or was it Miles Bridges?
The Miles Bridges one was probably better, just based on how far back he
Wow.
put that thing. Yeah, the Edwards dunk. The Edwards dunk was an all-timer, but the Bridges one, someone said recently that it reminded them of when Vince Carter dunked over Alonzo Mourning, and that was one of my favorite dunks growing up, being a
On
Nets
Clint
guy.
Capella too. That makes a big difference.
Correct,
I think
correct.
you Watanabe in Toronto, kind of a smaller wing. This was on a big center.
A shot blocker, a rim protector, one of the best shot blockers in the league, and so that to me was extra points.
All right, Nickelodeon, that game. So much fun. And I wanted to talk to you the next day. I was so excited, but you're a busy guy, so we'll talk about it now. How did that come together? And it was just such a smash success. I don't think I've seen anything in the sports world just get this much acclaim as that thing did. Because like you said, people always like to argue. You can argue pretty much anything on both sides in the sports world, but everybody was coming out of that game, whether it was your call, the integration of TikTok talk and the slime and the references to, Nick stuff growing up that we all grew up on. It just sucked people in and became a sensation in a way that I thought was so different and so needed in the sports world now, because we'll talk about where broadcasting's going and where these sports are going. It needs a lot of new life. And so for that to come through and be a smashing success the way it was, and it's targeting kids, but even people like me could watch and look back to childhood and enjoy that, all while enjoying a sports game as well. It was just like the perfect storm of three different things coming together in there from my standpoint. I'll just let you fire away on how that came together and what that day was like and what preparation went into it, and ultimately the reaction that followed.
First of all, I appreciate all the kind words, and I'm glad that you enjoy the game, because we enjoyed doing the game just as much.
And it wasn't a great game either, which says all the more.
Exactly right. And so how it came together, pretty simple. I think once Viacom and CBS all merged into one massive company, well, Viacom owns Nickelodeon as well. And so they had this idea that they built up and they pitched to the NFL to do this game, to cater it to kids or to a new audience of non-football fans, and to make it fun and to do a playoff game. And the NFL was all in. They were on board. They were excited about it. And so they had reached out, and by they, I mean CBS had reached out to me while the bubble was still happening. So it was, I think, maybe during or just after our Clippers series with the Nuggets. And they called me and said, would you be interested in potentially doing this? And I said, yeah. It's literally created for my two favorite things, sports and entertainment. And I grew up loving Nickelodeon and a bunch of the shows on that channel. And so for me, I was like, yeah, 100%. They said, okay, well, you're going to have to talk to Nickelodeon. They'll see if they like you, and then we'll see if you're in. And so I got to talk to some people at Nickelodeon, just similar to how we are, over Zoom. And I must have convinced them enough, because they liked me enough to give me the keys to the assignment. And so from that point on, we got ready. I mean, this was months ahead of time, right? This was back in maybe August, I guess. It was August. So back in August for a game that wasn't going to be until January. But they wanted to make sure everything was in place. So we were good to go from there. I did one practice game over the computer, which was nearly impossible to do, with Nate and Gabby, who were both on the broadcast with us. And from there on, we got our assignment. We went. And the biggest thing that we all agreed on was, let's just have fun. And I mentioned it earlier, blank canvas. This is nothing that has ever been done before. But the idea was to cater it towards kids, cater it towards people that maybe have never watched an NFL game before. So as a result, we had to do a decent amount of teaching and blend it with, okay, we don't want to talk down to people. We also don't want to give too much info for the people who do know what they're looking at and what they're watching. And so we have to blend those. We have to blur those lines. And that was the biggest challenge, was to almost bridge the gap between the two. Because to your point, I think the biggest surprise for us were, we knew kids were going to like it. We had a good inclination that kids anywhere from 3 through 12 or whatever it would be were going to enjoy themselves watching the game. What we didn't think was going to happen was the degree in which 55, 65-year-old people who tuned in liked it and wanted to stay and stick around and watch. And so that was cool. The fact that we got that wide-ranging audience and we really did connect with somebody from pretty much every age group in between, that means that we did what we were supposed to. And so we were thrilled to see the reaction that it got, and we hope that we get to do it again soon.
Was your phone just blowing up for days?
Yeah, definitely. It was. My phone definitely malfunctioned at one point.
Yeah, I remember my favorite, and there was so many great moments in it. Probably when you handed off to Gabby and let her run the play-by-play, because it was just like, you were handing the baton and she was just trying out something that she wasn't 100% comfortable with, but it ended up just being a funny moment. And I think everybody involved kind of just put their pride to the side a little bit and had fun with this, and just try to create these funny, almost like inside the NBA in a way, moments where you could just laugh at yourself and have a good time and joke around and just throw stuff all over the place and see what sticks out there. I know you did a ton of game planning from like the reference perspective. You went and looked at a bunch of old Nickelodeon references and had those piled up for all these different plays, and that played well, sprinkling out throughout. I think you threw a good one out on a long sideline run, if I can remember right. But most of it just felt so natural and like just spur of the moment stuff. What, when you look back on it, worked best, and what was maybe your favorite moment of the night?
Ooh, it's tough to pick a favorite, and I did enjoy giving Gabby the play-by-play responsibilities. That was fun. That was unplanned. It was getting towards the end of the game, and as you mentioned, it wasn't necessarily a close game, and so I was thinking, all right, well, how can we keep having fun? And so I just asked the truck, are you guys cool if I do that? And they were like, yeah, absolutely. I like that. I like the fact that we highlighted how talented both Gabby and Lex Lumpkin, our sideline reporter, are, because they can do a variety of things. And so I asked them ahead of time, well, you give me some of the stuff you can do. What are some of the things that you do on Nickelodeon? So they told me impressions that they do. And so I tried to tee them up for those things like that. But yeah, I don't know if I could pick a favorite part. I really enjoyed the whole thing. I was a bit bummed that I didn't end up getting slimed, because that's every Nickelodeon kid's dream. Everybody who watched the channel.
That was Sean Payton, right?
Sean Payton, yes. He ended up getting one of the buckets remaining and got him all over his J's, which I was like, whoa, bro. You gotta take those off. But apparently he's a Jordan brand ambassador. So now I realize I have something to aspire to in life, being someone who likes sneakers way too much for my own good. I need to become a Jordan brand ambassador at any and all costs, because that would literally it would be complete. My life would be complete at that point. I'd accomplish whatever I need to accomplish from Sean Payton's perspective. But yeah, so that was one of it. There was also a bunch of equipment nearby. So at the very last second, they said, oh, no, you can't do that. But no, the whole thing was it was a ton of fun, honestly. And we had a ton of fun with it. And like I said, hopefully we get to do it again. And we can now, with that experience, add more to it the next time. But it was all good. It was all an absolute blast. And I'm just glad that people responded the way they did.
No, it just makes me smile even looking back on it. And it's something that no one's going to go back and watch Saints Bears highlights from the first round of the playoffs that year, but everyone's going to go back and look at those moments in the booth. And I think that's just going to make you smile too. The fact that, you don't want to become the story, but if you can add to the story and supplement it in a way that brings people back to that game, or just brings people to the game in the first place, I think has to be an awesome thing for you. Now, looking forward off that, I don't know how many games are going to be done on Nick in the future, how many broadcasts are going to be done in non-traditional ways going forward, but I do think it connects well to the NBA. And I know you're on radio and there's not a ton of ability experience right now, but perhaps later in your career, being part of this new wave that I think the league desperately needs. I talked about, some of my gripes with the Celtics broadcast this year, and some of it's, people shifting around and them trying to figure out what's next after Mike and Tommy were institutions for 40 years. That's difficult, but I think that's a challenge the whole league's facing. I mean, broadcast booths have gotten really old across this league. The broadcasters and analysts of the game are getting older and older. There's a line where the league shifted at some point, and I think a lot of people look at the Shaqs and Barkleys of the world as looking at the game from like an outdated perspective. And that's kind of the majority voice. The fan base is much younger. The voices and analysts around the game are much older. That could just be as simple as getting more young guys in the booth like you. But I think there's more to it too. I think, my biggest thing, and people have been saying this online forever, is that, you need voices that empower the sport. Don't talk down on it. Like, we've all heard the different older voices around the game that have said, this is nothing compared to when we used to play. This new game's soft. This game's terrible. Like, that just doesn't do the league well. And this is what's going on their broadcast night in and night out. So I think it drives people crazy that the product's so good. I wasn't alive in the 80s and 90s, but I've watched a lot of video, and it's just indisputable to me that there's more talent in the league than ever before. There's more compelling storylines, and just the competition, especially this year that we've seen, is incredible. So, like, how do we find a, broadcasting future for this league that represents that? And what do you think, like, your kind of part in it all is going to be?
Well, I would tell you that it's all cyclical, and this happens no matter what sport you're talking about as well. If you go back to, so let's talk about the era of all those people that you mentioned, the Barkleys, the Jordans, the Ewings, the Olajuwons. That's the era of, hey, it was physical. It was, you're not getting anything easy inside. Well, you can go back and listen to Wilt Chamberlain talk on any talk show. He used to go on those late night shows all the time, and he would say, oh, none of those guys could play when we played because we would really go after each other. It's just how it is. This is how it works. And no matter the facet, no matter the area of life, I feel like that's how it works when you're talking about anybody. I'm sure that there are singers who say, actually, speaking of DMX, rest in peace, there was a video that came out about him recently when he was on
Wes
one of the
and Drake,
shows.
yeah.
And he was saying how he doesn't like any rappers now. He doesn't feel like they're part of the game. So I just think that's how it is in life in general. So I don't know if it's something that's a problem that really needs to be solved imminently in the NBA. I think that over time, as you said, more and more younger people start to take over more and more after years and years. And just because people can't do this forever, people can't live forever, unfortunately. I wish they could, because it would be awesome to be able to go back and talk to like Abraham Lincoln. That'd be cool, but we can't do that, right? So as a result, I just think that's all part of the cycle. And as the next cycle comes and more people have immersed themselves into the modern style of play and the modern game, you're going to get more of an appreciation for the modern game. And then in 10 to 20 years, more and more people will say, well, back in our day, we used to shoot from just 25 feet, not 45 feet. It's just how it works. But then as over time, different aspects of the game will creep in, and there will be different wrinkles, and we'll have to appreciate those as well. So I think that's the best part about sports, is it's always evolving. The NFL, I'm sure that there are NFL players that are saying, well, this guy, they wouldn't be able to throw for 500 yards on our old defense. Guess what? I'm sure they would, because over time, the whole point of the sport, right, is to get better and to improve and find ways. It'd be like if we were all still driving the buggy from the 60s. Well, no, we've got cars that are better and more improved and safer and drive faster and smoother, and the engine works better because over time we have found ways to work out the kinks and bugs. So I just think that's true in general, and that's always going to be the case. But yeah, to your point, as more time goes and more people who have grown up in this era are working and are prominent voices around the sport, then you're going to get more of that appreciation.
For sure. We'll take it back where we started. Jim Boeheim, I think they asked him at some point this year, has Buddy surpassed you as a Syracuse player so far? And he said, no, I'm still the better player historically in Syracuse history. When it comes to contrasting who you are as a broadcaster and who your dad is, Ian Eagle, as a broadcaster, I definitely see that you pulled a lot from him. That's just a given, the inspiration that you pulled from your father. But how do you contrast yourself to try to be a different voice in this game for years to come?
Yeah, it's tough because he's really good, and you want to be like him, or at least I do, because I watch his games or I listen to what he does if he's doing radio, and I'm saying, man, it's really good. He nailed every single part, every single aspect of the job. Whatever was required, whatever was asked, he did it and then some. And I think the biggest thing that he always passed down to me in terms of broadcasting was to be myself, and how imperative it is to be a successful broadcaster in any facet. You have to be 100% authentic. And so for me, what's a little different is, we talked about it, being younger, I've got more of a touch of, TikTok or whatever's going on social media, or some of the more, I wouldn't want to say less pressing storylines, but less pressing storylines around the world of things that maybe other people don't care as much about. So I just try to be myself, and myself is definitely similar to him in many ways, but different in others. We've got similar sense of humor, but sometimes a bit different. And so it's just being me and letting the rest take care of itself, and interacting when I am working with others, interacting with others at a very high level, and trying to establish legitimate relationships and friendships with those people off the air so that it's easy on the air. But a lot of that comes from him. And so it's blending those, it's blurring those lines again, and it's a process over time. I'm still trying to work it all out as I go on, but I'm only in year 2, and hopefully it's a long several years ahead of time to continue to mold that personality and mold that voice over the years.
He is Noah Eagle. You can find him on Twitter at Noah Eagle 15, the radio voice of the LA Clippers. You can hear him on Sirius XM NBA channel as well. I'll leave you with some advice since you wanted it so bad. Quarantine taught me, we were all trying to grow our beards. I couldn't do it, believe it or not. So I just shaved everything else, experimented with the mustache, and it worked. So there you have it.
All right. So I'm going to, like
just
I said,
keep experimenting.
Next time we do this, it could be a hardened beard. It could be a Fu Manchu. You don't know what's coming. It's just going to be a surprise. But I'm going to have to come with a little action. I'll tell you that much.
For sure. Just keep trying new things out there in LA. I texted your dad this morning for some preview stuff, and he said the LA life is treating you well. How are you acclimating to LA life? I know you're representing with Death Row there. You're enjoying the sun, exercise, basketball outside. Like, what's LA Noah like?
It's pretty much the same. I always an LA type of person inside, and it just brought more of it out of me. So gluten-free. No, I don't. I still eat gluten. I'm not that far removed. But no, yeah, it's good, man. It's I wake up every day, and it's the opposite of what we experienced at Syracuse or on the Northeast, where every single day it's sunny, it's 75 or so degrees, and I just wear whatever I want. And that aspect has been great because, as I said, I'm a big sneaker guy, and when we were in Cuse, I could not wear all my sneakers because they would just get crushed in the snow. I was wearing Timbs every day. Out here, I can't wear Timbs. It's the opposite, but I can wear all my sneakers, and so I can experiment and I can mix and match a bit more, which plays right into my interests and my likes. So that aspect has been good. And yeah, the lifestyle, it's hard to beat.
When you're in Boston in seasons to come, I don't want you to get too used to that LA sun and weather and be complaining about the snow and cold, because you went through it in Syracuse, and that should set you up for anywhere. I don't like 5 years. 5 years. Within 5-10 years, I don't want to hear any complaints when you go on these cold weather trips.
I'll be honest with you, I'm already complaining, so I'm gone.
Oh my God,
I've lost it all.
On 50-degree afternoons,
ultra soft, real fast. Cool. It's all good. I've admitted it. I've come to terms with it, but I've gone soft, and I'm okay with that. I can handle it still, but I'm okay.
55 degrees. No.
Pretty much, yeah. That's pretty much me now. Where are my seat heaters?
All right, he is Noah Eagle here on Dome Theory. Great talking to you. Enjoy the rest of the season. We'll be following along your coverage throughout the playoffs, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.